A year. I can't. If I go back a year, I can't help but think change or experience. Change or experience. It's what they. And it seems like we're in a time of change right now. But I would like to know, Laphroaig. Would you say you're a brand of change or experience?
Laphroaig is the whiskey of change, and it's the whiskey of experience.
Cheers. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've tasted the rest. Now we're about to taste the best. We're going to go over to Scotland now. Scotland! But change your experience. Well, this is it's really apropos for the whiskey we're about to taste there, Steve. Certainly, the whiskey that we're going to taste comes from the island of Islay, the Happy Island, and it is the Laphroaig Quarter Cask. Now, you've got to keep in mind, this tiny little distillery on the island of Islay, 3,000 people, 8 distilleries, and we've been making there legally since 1825, but as we've been making whiskey in Scotland since the 14th century, we still see bourbon as Canadian, and Canadian whiskey as a bit of a fad. We've been around for a few years longer. But certainly, when it comes to Laphroaig, it was the Johnston brothers who came over from the mainland of Scotland to farm the island of Islay back in the 18th century. And as many distilleries, as many farmers did with the extra grain, they made whiskey out of that barley that they were using to feed the cattle. And they found they were making more money making the whiskey, so they stopped farming altogether and they went into whiskey making. With that tradition of whiskey making, they established the finest single malt whiskey from the island of Islay in Laphroaig. Now, by 1847, Donald Johnston, one of the brothers, fell into a vat of burnt pot ale at the distillery, succumbed to his injuries. So we like to say there's a little bit of the Johnston family in every bottle of Laphroaig. And as Mr. Lubbers had mentioned earlier, during Prohibition, you could get a prescription for Laphroaig here in the United States. We campaigned vigorously here in the United States with this whiskey prior to Prohibition, and the American government, the congressmen, the senators, they would smell this whiskey and they would say, well, this must be pouring on your wounds. And I say, drink it, it's going to go to your wound and anything else that might be ailing you at that time. So what we have here tonight with Laphroaig Quarter Cask, what it is we're aging in bourbon barrels, and certainly that is more the traditional method. 90% of the barrels today are used American bourbon barrels in Scotland, and that's because, thank you. We recycle.
You know what? I'm going to give all 3 of you a point for that one.
Hey, where's that guy? Sit down. Sit down. So what we do is, 90% of the barrels in Scotland, that was post-Prohibition. I thought it was a congressman with a vested interest in the timber industry. But what I found out, it was the American Cooper unions, the barrel makers. They wanted to make sure there was work for themselves. So they mandated it, and stuck ever since. And that's perfect for us in Scotland, because we don't want to use a brand new barrel. There's too many tannins in the wood. So send us your used barrels. We're going to age our whiskey in those barrels. And so what we've done is with the quarter cask, this is a throwback to the early days of whiskey making. We're aging in those 200-liter bourbon barrels for 5 to 11 years. And then after aging it for the 5 to 11 years, we then put it into a smaller cask that's quarter the size. And by putting it in the smaller barrel, you get more of the influence of the wood on the whiskey. There's more of an oaky sweetness compared to the big smoke you get at the top of the taste with the Laphroaig 10 or the 10 cask strength, for those of you that know the other Laphroaig marks.